Before there was Noet, there were bedtime stories. It was before I started elementary school. My mom would tell my brother and me imaginative stories every night in the dark before we fell asleep. Every evening ended with another adventure. Looking back, I think that's where I first learned that entire worlds could exist inside someone's imagination. My dad inspired me in a different way. He was an incredible artist. As a child, I wanted to draw just like he did. I would later understand that his own life was far more complicated than I realized back then, but as a little girl, I didn't see any of that. I only saw someone who could create worlds with a pencil. And so I started to draw my own. I'd sketch beautiful places, invent characters, and make up stories about the people who lived there. Even before I knew what world building was, I was trying to build worlds. And then at 21 years old was when I first saw Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Ring. Unlike a lot of fantasy fans, I didn't grow up reading Tolkien. In fact, I didn't even know who he was before then. I think my brother once received a comic book version of The Hobbit when we were kids, but neither of us really got into it. I didn't see The Fellowship of the Ring in theaters. I watched it later on video, but it changed the direction of my life. People often say the original Star Wars inspired them to become filmmakers, and The Lord of the Rings did something similar for me. I didn't walk away from watching it saying, "Wow, I wish I lived in Middle Earth." I walked away thinking, "Wow, I want to build a whole world too." So for the first time, I understood what was possible when someone spent years, even decades, bringing a world to life. At first, I honestly didn't understand how Tolkien had done it. The world felt so deep and complete that I went back and read The Hobbit just to get a better understanding of the storyline. Then I began learning about Tolkien himself. The languages, the mythology, history, maps, cultures, and even the decades he spent building Middle-earth before readers ever encountered it. That's when I realized if I want to create a believable fantasy world, I couldn't just start with writing the novel. I had to learn first. At the time, my life looked very different. I had dropped out of college when I was 19. I had my daughter when I was 20. And the next few years were spent doing what young parents do: working, trying to stabilize life, trying to pay the bills. Fantasy worlds weren't exactly practical goals. And so while the dream never disappeared, it did run in the background. But when I was 23, I decided it was time for me to go back to college. And it wasn't that I was going back for a career. I was going back for knowledge. Every class became another tool for building a world. I majored in English writing and minored in creative writing because I needed to learn storytelling. I also minored in ethnic studies because if I wanted to create a world, I needed to understand the people, not just the politicians and presidents. I majored in English writing and minored in creative writing because I needed to learn storytelling. I also minored in ethnic studies because if I wanted to create a world, I needed to understand the people, not just politicians and presidents. I studied religious studies because civilizations create beliefs before they create kingdoms. While reading a philosophy book titled Plato, Not Prozac, I encountered the Noetic world, the realm of understanding, the world of knowledge, and the moment I read that, I knew that was my world's name, Noet. Every lecture became another notebook page asking, How can I use this to create Noet? One day during a religious studies course, a professor made a statement that stayed with me ever since. She said, America is the only country without its own myth. Now, whether you agree with that statement or not, it did change how I thought. I realized Tolkien hadn't invented Middle Earth from nothing. He drew deeply from European folklore and mythology. So if I wanted to create something original, I couldn't simply borrow elves or dwarves or dragons or even hobbits. I'd have to imagine entirely new people, ecosystems, histories, creatures, civilizations, and the realization made the project much bigger and much harder. So while I was still in school, I discovered there was also a special topics class devoted entirely to Tolkien. Ironically, I couldn't take it because life got in the way with scheduling, babysitters, and adult responsibilities. But I remember saying to myself, one day I'm going to have a special topics course taught about my writing too. And looking back, that sounds incredibly ambitious and maybe even a little ridiculous, but dreams are allowed to be bigger than our circumstances. So over the years, the project kept growing. Science, architecture, ecology, psychology, geology, faith. Every subject became another piece of the planet, and eventually I realized something surprising. When I would tell people about it or what I was doing, they weren't just interested in the story I was writing. They were fascinated by the story behind the story. They wanted to know why the forests were crimson, why the cities looked the way they did, why every creature seemed to fit its environment. So instead of waiting until everything is finished, I decided to invite people into the process. And that's why this channel exists. I don't claim to know everything. I can't invent the chemistry of every grain of sand. I rely on scientists, historians, artists, writers, engineers, and I lean heavily on the liberal arts because that's where human civilization lives. But above all, I believe God is the true author. I don't see Noet as an idea I invented entirely on my own. I believe God placed the desire in me, gave me the abilities to pursue it, and used my education, experiences, and people I've met along the way, even my failures, as all a part of creating this world. So, in a sense, Noet is a story inside of the much larger story that God has been writing all along. So this channel isn't about just writing a fantasy novel, it's about building a believable world from the ground up. One city, one creature, one map, one idea at a time. So welcome to Noet. Let's build together.